What a time to be a college football fan. We don't always like it. We don't like all the news necessarily, or the would be news, or the potential results, or the potential possibilities, but sure keeps things interesting. Welcome into the Voice of College Football here on a Thursday afternoon, 1:30 Eastern Time. We're typically working away at other projects and videos and plans concerning the business of the Voice of College Football, but thought it necessary and interesting and intriguing and engaging for all of you to jump on board to talk about Dennis Dodd's latest, courtesy CBS Sports. So we will look at that and we will take it on together step by step in regards to what Dennis Dodd is telling us about the influence, the impact that the Big 12 and its grant of rights has had on the ACC, and then we will do our best to draw conclusions from that. Of course, we gain from these articles and from these guys, there's a handful of them, and each one of you, many of you, I should say, have your favorites: Pete Thamel, Dennis Dodd, Brett McMurphy, and others. There's a few out there. There's not many, but there's a few out there. And what becomes more and more intriguing about this is the interconnectedness of it all, and how there is not a conference that's not impacted in some way. Of course, we think of the Big Two, the SEC, and the Big 12 or the Big 10 being impacted or impacting others, and it being nothing but positive for those two conferences. And then we have to open up everything to interpretation and projection involving the other three to see whether it's truly good and beneficial for those three conferences. Again, appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Larry, thank you so much for encouraging everyone off the top to hit the like button. Before you get settled and bring in your comments and questions, please hit the like button. We are opening up the phone lines as we typically do. The call-in link is in the chat. And for many of you who have commented that you would like a call-in line, I need to look into Google Voice. I understand that that's an option, so we will look into that. In terms of just having a regular call-in line, unless we can get a sponsor that would promote and be able to sponsor and fund a call-in line, that just was not financially smart or feasible in terms of trying to stay in the black and not in the red. All right, everyone, welcome in again to the Voice of College Football. A little bit later tonight, a premiere of sorts here on the Voice of College Football, simulcasting over on the South Carolina channel, as we got Twisted Rooster coming in to talk South Carolina football with all of you live at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. So mark that down. It's on the community page as we post our schedule every day. So you all should know where we're going to be at least live every day. 7 o'clock Eastern Time, right here on the main channel, simulcasting on the South Carolina channel. Please subscribe over there. We have conversations with Chris Phillips of the Spurs Up Show, Will Gunter, 107.5 The Game in Columbia, South Carolina. So we are bolstering our South Carolina football coverage, and you get a look at that at 7 o'clock Eastern Time tonight with Twisted Rooster and South Carolina Gamecocks live. Clemson Tigers live, the All-In Show with Jordan Bowman and with Tiger Paw Craven coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern Time tonight on the Clemson channel. One more other programming note. We had a great time this past Tuesday night. We all got together via YouTube memberships and Patreon and watched the Clemson-Ohio State 2019 college football playoff game. If you don't recall, one of the better playoff games, and also extremely controversial, and again, exciting down to the wire, classic Clemson-Ohio State. And there's a bit of a national rivalry that has unfolded and has emerged based on their 4 postseason meetings just in the last, since 2013. So we all got together on that. I will tell you, here's the deal. We got a copyrights violation for that here at the Voice of College Football. I believe that there might be a way around that. I thought that we were safe because we were taking it behind the paywall and we were not going to be distributing this out to the entire YouTube public. that I thought that we might be okay, but we were not. So we were given a strike and told that the next time we'll be taken off the air for a week. So obviously we can't risk that. I do have some ideas on how we can possibly have a closed circuit viewing party of sorts as we go forward with other ideas that we've had that are best a viewing experience and not just a debate, but to actually watch the play, watch the game, watch the call, and to take it in together. And it was a great time. We had David, we had Jordan Bowman, we had, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have started to think about everybody that came on. Brian Knight came on, and we had a good time talking Clemson, Ohio State, and watching that game. And it's just amazing how that was 3.5 years ago. And I don't know if your past comes back at you in this way. There are certain things that happened 3 years ago that seem like they were a lifetime ago. There are other things that happened 30 years ago that seem like they were yesterday. It just all depends, for me at least, on a number of factors, I'm sure. So I won't try to get into my psyche. That would be a dangerous thing. But that just seemed like it was forever ago. It was only 3.5 years ago. It was only 3+ years ago. And it just seemed like that was just like we were watching on grainy SD. All right, we'll get to the ACC and the Big 12 here. We appreciate all of you. I don't have my glasses and I didn't put in my contacts, so we will suffer through, and maybe I'll jump up here and track those down at some point. Super chat coming in from Jason. Jason, thank you so much for that. Thank you for the super chat, Jason, a great supporter of the channels. Of course, Jason, a big Michigan fan. What's up, Mr. Rogers? This is your neighborhood. Well, it is my neighborhood, but we have frequent block parties in my neighborhood. Therefore, it's by extension, it's your neighborhood as well. Yes, I answer this question from time to time. Yes, the voice of college football. Here I am, the voice of college football. If you want to give me that title, I'll take it. People have. I did not give that to myself. That's not my character or personality. There were dozens of you that threw that at me. Love it. Thank you. But more importantly, we are the voice of college football. We are the voice of college football. You've got a voice. I've got a voice. Our guests, they've got a voice. We together, the voice of college football. All right, let's get to the Dennis Dodd article that came out earlier today. And thank you to the many people that kind of keep me updated on what's going on, because this stuff flies right by me. I'm working business like all day. Business, grow the business, build the business, work on the content. And so I miss many of these. So you know what? I'll be right back. We will not read this line by line, word by word. We will hit the highlights here. We go. So as the title says there, and again, let's give credit to Dennis Dodd, CBS Sports, inside the Big 12's ironclad grant of rights contract that helped keep the ACC together amid turbulence. We all know that 7 ACC schools, the ACC 7 got together last week, and they have, in regards to, I'm sure they've been together for a number of weeks, but they let us know that they are seeking legal counsel to look through the grant of rights and their options. So we talked about that. Please check out the videos and the live streams that we produced on that whole situation. So this is one of the main talking points. This is one of the main focal points of all of this in regards to what is going to happen, what could happen, what are the options, what are the possibilities, what are the probabilities, and what are the mountains that have to be scaled to get there. Of course, the Pac-12 media rights deal that's still out there, still being negotiated, that's one. A lot of people are joking and poking fun at the Pac-12 and predicting the Pac-12 demise. Others believe that they still have a viable league and will be able to survive and even thrive under a new media rights deal. But that's one of the talking points. That's one of the bullet points that is in play as a key to all of this, of course, is the Pac-12 media rights deal. This would be another one. The ACC grant of rights probably even supersedes, I would say, the Pac-12 media rights deal in regards to how it could affect the landscape of college football going forward. This is the biggest story. This dwarfs the Pac-12 media rights deal for a number of reasons. Because we're talking about higher leverage schools, we're talking about a more long-term either move towards stability or a dissolvement of the league, where the Pac-12 could possibly survive, good media rights deal or not. I think that's more certain. It's not certain. It's more probable. Again, this ACC shakeup with the grant of rights, this is cataclysmic kind of stuff if you're into all of the realignment and what college football could look like. So we see here a decade or so ago, the Big 12 and the ACC had discussions about playing future non-conference games. This played its way into the Big 12 letting the ACC in on its grant of rights and what it looked like in terms of it being a legal tool. Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby, former Big 12 Commissioner Bob Bowlesby, said it was a professional courtesy. The grant of rights is signed by all the schools. It literally, yes, is a grant. It grants the rights to broadcast their games to their respective conferences for the term of the league negotiated media rights deal. And so that's what has come to the forefront of this discussion concerning the ACC, is not just the buyout or getting enough programs together that want to leave the league. It's the monumental amount of money based on the broadcast rights and the money for those broadcast rights going forward for all their home games. So according to Dennis Dodd, he believes that this has become the foundation of these two Power 5 conferences' stability, is the grant of rights. Although we did see just less than 2 years ago, Texas and Oklahoma were able to break the grant of rights and be able to deliver enough money, $100 million, to break their grant of rights agreement. So I agree with that. The word stability is properly used. Stability, but not a guarantee. While every conference holds grant of rights agreements with its member institutions, the ACC modeled its version entirely off the Big 12 document. And they've been phrased as ironclad. So ironclad, in fact, that the Big 12 legal minds developed a strategy relying on a landmark 115-year-old Supreme Court case that traced its roots back to British common law in the 1600s. The Big 12 incorporated itself in Delaware. I find this interesting. Delaware, a state so business-friendly that 65% of Fortune 500 companies filed their incorporation papers there. Why that's legal, I don't know. Another matter there. I'm not saying that it should not be legal, but it doesn't sound above board to me. That would have to be explained to me why a corporation that's located, founded, and has its headquarters in Dallas, Texas, can go to Delaware to file those legal papers. So Texas and Oklahoma, yes, they were able to leave at a cost of a combined $100 million to exit the league in 2024. So other schools could exit the Big 12. It just seems to be, and certainly is, a bigger leap, a bigger financial burden it's the same amount of money, but for that particular school, it's going to be a bigger financial burden for them to leave the Big 12. And I also just believe that the Big 12, at this stage of the game, the Big 12 does not have any current schools that are attractive to anyone else outside of the Pac 12. And of course, the leverage seems to be in the Big 12's camp in regards to who would poach schools from which conference. That the Pac 12 schools would, of course, be going to the Big 12 seems more likely, much more likely, based on the media rights situation and the stability of the league. The Big 12 having 12 teams and the Pac 12 down to 10. And then again, the media rights situation and the security within the Big 12 versus what is lacking and a complete question mark and in doubt in the Pac 12 right now. On Wednesday, the ACC stiff-armed rumblings of a mutiny by going to a performance-based revenue model. Okay, when it comes to this situation with the performance-based revenue model, can everybody read this? I have found out recently that more of you watch your YouTube, the Voice of College Football, and others on your 50, 55, 65-inch televisions than you do on your phones. That kind of hit me. All right, so what we have here is the ACC stiff-armed rumblings of, yes, the mutiny by going to a performance-based revenue model. Yes, stiff-armed. Let's interpret stiff-armed. The ACC stiff-armed to basically say, we're going to deal with this and we're going to deal with it right now, and in the only way that they can at this point. So to me, this is a Band-Aid. This is simply a poorly positioned and, like a gash in the arm that needs a tourniquet. And yes, it's a small little, it's the very tiniest of the Band-Aids that you would buy for your 3-year-old. And it's just not going to hold, but they're doing something. They're putting up a good front. They're trying to appease their biggest revenue generators. Okay, its seemingly unbreakable grant of rights quelled any talk of a more significant uprising. Possibly. There is a stipulation in there concerning the competitive nature of the conference versus its opponents. And as our guy Tony Syracusa from Last Word on College Football pointed out when he came on last week, that is going to go from projection starting next season. That's going to go to reality. That's going to be in the here and now, that the Big Ten and the SEC are eons away from the ACC and the other conferences. And the ACC has a grant of rights which states that the league will be competitive with its competition. All right, what we're going to do here at the Voice of College Football is we're going to take this performance-based revenue model and we're going to apply some dollar figures to it to better get a grasp on what this could look like. So what I'm going to attempt to do today, not right now on the live stream, but when I get some time to look at this, is I'm going to take bowl revenue. I'm going to take college football playoff revenue that's being projected for 2024 with the 12-team expanded playoff and beyond, NCAA men's and basketball tournament revenue, and then say, okay, right now, let's say 7 of the 14 teams in the ACC go to a bowl game. So they get revenue from 7 teams that go to a bowl game. The other 7 benefit from the other 7 going to a bowl game, even though they did not qualify. And I believe that's an even distribution. Well, by all indications from the media and what was discussed from the ACC 7 and those conversations last week, that is an even distribution. It is an even distribution. For example, in the Big Ten, I know that it's an even distribution in the Pac-12, but it was not an even distribution pre-Larry Scott's commissioner headship in the Pac-12. And maybe that's a reason why the Pac-12 has been so mediocre, that when it was rewarding USC football, Washington football when they were good, whomever was good when they were rewarding, giving incentive to those programs to be better, to win more money, to earn more money in the postseason. Or I don't even think that distribution was based on postseason play in the Pac-12. But as of Larry Scott's tenure, they went back to an even distribution model. Again, that works in the Big Ten. Ohio State can go to 15 college football playoffs and Rose Bowls in a row, and they're not going to earn one more penny from those appearances than Indiana will. Everybody in the Big Ten gets the same amount of money. It all goes into one pool, and then it's evenly distributed. And apparently, based on what we found out here in the last week, that is what's going on in the ACC, is even distribution. Okay, let's understand that what the ACC announced yesterday on Wednesday was that the even distribution is going to continue in the regular season. So even though more people watch Florida State play football and Clemson and Miami play football than they do Georgia Tech and Duke and Virginia, that they will continue to split those revenues evenly during the regular season. But there is incentive now that's going to be in play for the ACC schools to make it to postseason play, because they are going to get a bigger cut of that postseason revenue. Now, how much of a bigger cut? You got to think that it's going to be fairly substantial. Otherwise, why do it? If you're going to go from a situation where you've got 14 teams splitting 100%. So do the math. It's about 7%, just over 7% in even distribution for anything, regardless of what you're splitting, 7%. So if it's $10 million, everybody gets $700,000. Okay. So when Clemson goes to the Orange Bowl and the payout for the Orange Bowl is $10 million, everybody in the ACC gets $700,000. Clemson gets $700,000. Georgia Tech gets $700,000 for Clemson making it to the Orange Bowl. Well, what do you think they're going to do? Maybe they'll go with some kind of split that says, okay, out of that $10 million from the Orange Bowl payout, Clemson gets 5 and the rest of the league gets the other 5. So now you've got, instead of $700,000 per, or I'm sorry, instead of, $700,000 per school for Clemson's appearance in the Orange Bowl, Clemson gets $5 million now, not the $700,000. They get $5 million, and everybody else gets $350,000. So there you go. There's incentive right there. In the old days, in the former model, you go to the Orange Bowl and you get $700,000, and your rival does too, and everybody else gets $700,000. But now you get $5 million, and everybody else gets $350,000. Wow, that's a huge difference. Now, that is not what is being reported. That has not been reported. They are still working out those details. I am just coming up with a 50-50 model of revenue distribution. And what I would like to do is go through that. And again, look at all the bowl money that comes into the ACC. The college football playoff money, will project that with 2 or 3 teams making it from that conference. Probably 2 would be a decent projection, a reasonable one. And then men's and women's NCAA tournament, to see how that will play out going forward. Super chat coming in from Miami Flow. Miami Flow, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for that contribution. Love what you do, Mark. Keep grinding. We know nothing more than that, Miami Flow. That's what we do. So thank you for your contribution. Who do we have here? Is this Baylor? BU? At the Big 12 with Patrick. Thank you so much for joining. I just saw the dollar figure, so I was drawn immediately to it. $5 plus 32 equals 37 million. Still not going to please Florida State and Clemson. Yeah, so basically what Patrick's done here is, I don't think he's done any kind of particular math, but it's a reasonable figure. It's probably very close to what we're talking about, is saying, okay, and The Big Ten, the SEC are going to be in the $80 million range. And then the ACC is in the $32 million range. And then they redistribute and it pops up another 5 for Florida State and Clemson. No, it's not going to please them at all in any such way. It's just showing that they're going to do something. They're going to address this. This is the only way that unless somebody can come up with some brilliant plan, how are they going to generate significant? That's another comment that was made by Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, is that they are going to go and really investigate other ways to generate revenue, to increase their revenue. Hey, God help them. I hope that they're able to do that, but I do not find any possible ways that they can generate significant increases in money. How would they possibly do that? What would that be outside of media rights? Media rights are everything. I used to give tours at ESPN, and those were sometimes just public tours, but most of the time it was some kind of big wig, some kind of a corporate executive, and a number of people like that would come in, and I would give tours. And I would always stop them at some point and ask them, because it became very apparent that they were fixated on television equipment and trucks, production trucks, and all of that, which is, of course, very expensive. But I would ask them, I would say, what is the single biggest expenditure for ESPN? And they would guess 15 other things. And then I would say, broadcast rights. That's what makes all of this go. And even though in this new age of media consumption, content consumption being shifted from over the air and cable distribution into streaming and online, well, it's still media. It's still rights. They are still rights fees. All right, we'll get back at it here. So I got hung up on that because I am going to look into that a little bit further to try to give some, but the guess by Patrick is certainly close. There is certainly, maybe it's 3.8 million, maybe it's 5.9 million, but yeah, that's got to be pretty close to what that could possibly be. And then think of that, for a lot of teams in the league, that's going to be a wash. There could be the NC States of the world that are in the middle portion of the league, Louisville, where that's a wash. Okay, we performed a little bit better and brought in a little bit more money than the rest of the league on average. So we get, I'm sure it could be kind of amusing when you start talking about wealth distribution or kind of a luxury tax distribution. And if you're breaking it down by the dollar, Louisville could get a check for $787. There you go. You perform better than the average school in the ACC and provided more income in postseason play, but this is what it comes out to. And for others, Virginia Tech's done really poorly in both football and basketball. Not that I follow basketball, but I believe basketball and other schools, to where, their 32 million is going to become 28 million. So it's going to go in the opposite direction too. It's just not adding on to Clemson, Florida State, and a few others. It's taking away from the others. And as we know, we've got 7 programs that are looking into their legal options. The grant of rights 2036. So Dennis Dodd is telling us here, although not exactly a picture of harmony, the Big 12 and now the ACC have successfully retained their membership. So according to Dennis Dodd, this is done. This is a done deal. And on the Big 12 front, I agree with him because of the lack of value of any individual school and football program to the SEC or the Big 10. And I've held that view since Oklahoma and Texas left, and since the Big 12 stabilized by adding the 4 schools that it did. My viewpoint in the Big 12 since then has been good for the Big 12. They went out and got the 4 most valuable schools that were available. And those were the 4 schools. You can check out my content right after Oklahoma and Texas left. I said, go get Houston, BYU, Cincinnati, and UCF. And certainly the Big 12 was not listening to me, but that's how they surveyed the field in a much more in-depth nature, but in a similar fashion than I did. And they came up with the 4 best options. So good for them. They stabilized their league, because think about that. If you're a 10-team league, they were already the smallest conference in the Power 5. They lost their 2 largest members. So they lost 20% of the league, and they lost probably 50% of the marketability. And so they were teetering on this. Well, if we lose, if somebody else becomes attractive to another conference and is willing to give up maybe revenue distribution in that conference, much like Maryland and Rutgers did going to the Big Ten, the Big Ten is still not paying Maryland and Rutgers at the same rate as the rest of the schools. This is crazy, but USC is going to be making more money next year from its distribution, as I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how I've understood it from several sources, that USC will be receiving a larger cut of the pie next season than, and I don't know if UCLA will as well. So it might be both of them. Larger slice of the pie to USC than Maryland and Rutgers 10 football seasons after they joined the Big Ten in 2014. Unbelievable. So the Big 12 was in a precarious state because, hey, the Iowa States and Kansases and all of those other schools within the Big 12, I in no way doubted their public rhetoric that they were loyal to the Big 12, that they wanted to stay in the Big 12, that they wanted to solidify and go forward. I completely agreed with that, completely accepted that as being the truth. But the bottom line is self-survival, is survival of the fittest and doing what is best for your school, not what is best for the conference. You're a school, you're a football and athletics department for your school first, and you were a conference member second. So sure, if Iowa State thought that the Big 12, if the Big 12 would have lost 2 other schools before they gained the 4, if Kansas basketball would have been so attractive to the Big Ten that the Big Ten would have said, come this way, and let's say, who else is marketable? Maybe Oklahoma State as well, to either the Big Ten or the SEC, and the Big 12 would have went down to 6. Then Cincinnati, UCF, and those other schools, BYU and Houston, would have been second guessing and thinking, okay, are we going to join? And as I understand it, that even was a partnership between those schools to all join, because Cincinnati at the Big 12's weekend estate was not going to join the Big 12 by itself. They needed to know that they had legitimate partners going with them. They weren't going to go to a Big 12 that was down to 8 and possibly being, other schools courted by other major conferences, and Cincinnati by itself. No, they formed an agreement or an alliance, an understanding that they were all leaving for BYU independent status, for the other 3, the American Conference, to go to the Big 12. So yes, Dennis Dodd, when he says not exactly a picture of harmony, no. Can you imagine the ACC? There are 7 schools that are publicly having legal teams review their situation to leave a league. And now, even if the ACC is able to keep them under wraps, that is not a good situation. So not exactly a picture of harmony is a nice way to say there is going to be angst and contention between those 7 schools especially the ones earning the top end dollars, Clemson, Florida State, and the ACC. And I said it from the time that this became a story. And I said it many times that I did not know about this grant of rights. I'm not a lawyer. I've not read it. Again, we had Tony Syracusa on here last week from Last Word on Sports. He did a phenomenal job explaining the grant of rights and what he believed were the possible gaps and openings for those ACC schools. But what I said initially was, it's almost like many of you can think to a number of contracts that you've been involved with and attached to, where there have been changes in the industry, there have been changes in the financial status of either party, there have been changes within the workplace, there have been changes in some way that have caused that agreement to be, that contract to be reviewed and looked at and looked upon much differently a year later or 5 years later than it was originally when it was agreed upon by both, and with a smile on each party's face to go into this agreement hand in hand. But things changed. And again, many of you can relate to that situation. So then neither party is necessarily going to get out of the contract, but that doesn't mean that there's a good working relationship. And that's not a good way to do business, to have partners because of what's legal and what is binding, and not because you made this partnership and you're both benefiting and it's healthy and it's flourishing. No, it's just one side wants to get out of it and they can't. That's not a healthy situation. And based on where we stand here in 2023, 13 years away from 2036, now so much can change. But let's say that the ACC and this grant of rights is ironclad. What are they going to do in 2036 or any time close to 2036? How are they going to? The only thing that comes to mind is that their commissioner at this point in 2036, and I would bet against it being their current commissioner, Jim Phillips. It's going to be somebody else. That commissioner is going to have to go to the networks or whatever our structure of media is 13 years from now. Think 13 years ago in 2010. And it's not really changed in regards to the heavy hitters, but in terms of distribution, it's obviously changed. And if I'm running the ACC, I'm 3 or 4 years out before 2036, and I'm going to those networks and I'm trying to get something established so I can go to Florida State, I can go to Clemson, I can go to the rest of them and say, this is what we're worth, this is what we're going to get. That's about the only way I can see this league surviving. All right. We have left the link in the chat if you'd like to join us. As Dennis Dodd states here, programs try to leave conferences without proper notice or negotiation. The grant of rights ensures that a party school's broadcast rights and revenues remain with the television contract. We discussed that. Court battles over grants of rights have largely been avoided since 2010, though there have been some bitter fights over the years. Okay, before Texas and Oklahoma, the Big 12 lost Colorado, Missouri, Nebraska, and Texas A&M in the early 2010s as the SEC and Big Ten expanded. So that is pre-grant of rights. Reaping increased media rights along the way, they left the rest of the FBS in the financial dust. So those three schools left for greener pastures financially and in terms of brand name when it comes to Missouri, SEC, and Nebraska Big Ten. And it was simply a financial move, and they didn't have this hurdle that the rest of them have with a grant of rights now. We know what the gap is. It's $30 million. And I'm curious about playoff distribution of money. If the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have, let's say, 4 teams in the playoff, let's say minimum 3, sometimes 4 teams in the playoff, if that is strictly going to be a playoff split, excuse me, a playoff split between all the conferences, or I've got to think that there's going to be an unequal revenue distribution from the playoff, which means the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be even richer. Has anyone come across those figures or that outline of playoff revenue? And as we've talked about here, that alone has caused consternation within the league, meaning the ACC. It would cost a reported $120 million for an ACC school to leave early, not counting a monster negotiation to get out of the grant of rights. But with 13 years to go on that ironclad agreement with little leverage, the ACC got its schools to fall into line. Again, boy, unless they can really mend fences and make things and make life beautiful for these ACC schools, I don't know how they keep a conference past 2036, even if they're able to legally hold it down until then. And then Bowlesby goes into, and Dennis Dodd go into the copyright law that we talked about off the top and outlined there. And so, again, what I would like to do today is to look at revenue from the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournament, bowl revenue, and also college football playoff revenue, what that's going to look like going forward starting in 2024, put that into some type of equation, and maybe we'll start with a 50-50 split. Per my earlier example, Clemson goes to the Orange Bowl. They make $10 billion for the conference now, and it's split evenly. But going forward, they get 50%, and the rest of the conference gets 50%. That is a enormous difference. Can always join the show. We will leave the link. Otherwise, again, be looking out for this today. I'm going to take these numbers. Well, I'm going to have to find the numbers. We don't have the numbers here, but we're going to have to find the numbers on bowl revenue, on college football playoff revenue starting in 2024, or at least look at the last 9 years of what the playoff revenue's been with the 14 playoff, and then look at NCAA basketball postseason revenue, because this is what's being determined by the ACC in terms of a unequal revenue distribution, and see what that really does for these schools. As has been pointed out, it's significant. It would be significant to you and me, of course, but to these schools and these conferences, not really significant enough to make up for that gap. Of course, you're not going to make up for the gap because you're still talking about the same amount of money. So the amount of money brought in is not changing. So that's the big problem. Sounds like a conversation I had just the other day with the guy that's working with me here. Is that, yeah, you can work around all sorts of distributions of money, but if nobody's satisfied with the amount of the money that they're getting and the total amount of revenue is not increasing, then then nobody's going to continue to be happy. You can only make the unhappiest and the biggest earners or the biggest components, Florida State, Clemson, you can only make them less unhappy is all you can do, because the pie is still the same. The pie is just going to be redistributed. Now, one positive here for the ACC that's brought up from time to time, and let's keep this into account, is that the Big 12 payout each year is stagnant. It's unchanging. It's the same payout every year from their media rights deal. So it's X number of dollars divided by 10-year contract, and they get the same amount every year. The ACC is on a sliding scale up. So when you see the ACC figure versus the total contract figure for the Big 12, consider that the ACC has already gotten past its lowest earning years. The amount is going up every year for the ACC. So please understand that. So their situation is getting better, but it's not getting better to the extent that they need it to be better to compete. And yes, Patrick, I understand that the Big 12 contract is coming up before the ACC. They're all coming up before the ACC contract. So even the SEC and the Big 10, consider this, the SEC and the Big 10, the Big 10 contract, for as massive as it is only 7 years. And when have media rights deals ever gone down? Never gone down for anybody of substance. So the Big 10 contract could be even larger. All right. Going to the phone lines. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Huffer Billy.
Hey, Mark. It's good to talk to you, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing?
I'm good. I just, because this topic has been obviously at the top of mind for anybody at Clemson or Florida State, and I'll guarantee you, almost every ACC team's worrying about it. But what I'm really interested in sharing with everybody, and I don't know how real it is. I think it's real because there's too much smoke. There's some fire somewhere. But there is a discussion that Clemson is serious, and I'm not kidding, about going independent for a period, maybe 1 or 2 years until all this stuff gets out of the system. But that's what they're talking about doing. They think they've got a way out of the GOR. They got a legal way, and I still haven't gotten to the bottom of what it is. So I'm not going to tell you I know that. But
yeah,
there's people that are really close. They're going, yeah, they may go independent for a while just to prove to everybody that they're over that. And I don't know if it'll last for long, but that's kind of the noise I'm hearing. I just thought I'd bring it up because it's interesting rumor, and it's kind of hot. It's kind of smoky. So,
well, think about this. So there's no way we can do the math off the top of our heads, but we'll try it. If every team in the ACC is earning $35 million, and that's 35 times 14, whatever that figure is per season. 35 times it's 500 million, something.
Yeah,
it's
like almost $500 million. Yeah.
Well, if Clemson is probably worth more than twice what the average ACC school is worth on television. Let's say they are. Let's say it's exactly
around 60, 64, 65.
Okay, and you're saying that based on the numbers you've crunched?
Yeah, we were looking at it. Well, I say we. There's a lot of folks have been looking at it, and they think it's somewhere between 58 and 64. So
okay, 58 to 64. That makes sense. So I was shooting a little higher than that, but there we go. 65.
Well, that's a conservative. You don't want to tempt fate, right?
I would also think that it would be more cost effective for a network to deal with one team, and there would be less overhead to deal with. And so they might be able to get even more money out of the network because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the thought process, and it's not because they want to do it that way. I mean, they really would prefer to go to the conference. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's the weirdest thing. I know everybody thinks we would go to the SEC, and I do too, because I think the culture's right.
Yep.
But there's a propensity for the people leading Clemson to go to the big. They really are leaning that way inside. So I think it's the academic side of the thing. I think they always have strived to be something more than a podunk Southern school. And that's kind of nice for them to think that way. But they're still in the South and they're still in a rural area and they still have to serve the rural South. And it's tough. It's a tough thing to do. You know, it's kind of like West Virginia. It's a great mission to do that. But that's what I'm worried about a little bit. When I start looking at it, I think Clemson's probably going to have to do something as an interim because they can't wait forever. And the SEC is nervous; they don't want to get involved. And the Bigs got their own; they can't dilute their costs or their payout. So everybody's got those issues. So I don't know. We'll see if it works that way. But anyway, I thought it was interesting, and I like the fact that people like that. Think like that. My Clemson brethren and a lot of the people that are close into the program. But ideally, we'd go to a conference. That would be it. But
Sure.
I don't know. I don't know if it's going to happen day one. It may happen 2 years from after we get out. But I just wanted to call in and throw it out there because it gives a lot of people something to just an angle to worry or think about to say whether or not it's going to happen. That's all.
All right, Huffer Billy, that's a great take. That's interesting. I've heard that, but I've not heard that with the figures and with some of the. Not that you were completely upfront, but in regards to some of the things that you are have talked about and are privy to a certain extent, that there's some weight to it. There's some,
yeah. I don't mean, like I said, that they want to be conservative with the numbers because they're trying to run them, and they're going to have to go through a lawsuit for sure. There's going to be some money there, and they don't want to overstate the worth here. I do think it's probably more, but at the same time, that's why Notre Dame's getting what they get, and I think that's the fun part. If everybody would look at what Notre Dame's doing, they're doing it for a reason. I know they have cachet. Notre Dame is obviously a historic program, but when you're independent, you get a lot more control and a lot more power or leverage. And that's what I think is happening here. Some of the bigger teams are going to. Florida State's another one. I don't think they're out of it either. I think they may do the same. But I think the SEC will take them pretty quick. I do. I think it's going to happen.
yeah,
So
I
we'll
think
see.
there's a handful of schools that have that type of national following or regional following enough to pull it off. I know that with everything that was bantied about with COVID and the Big Ten possibly not playing, there was a large contingent of people that, not anyone that necessarily counted, but tons of people that said Ohio State could just break off and just be independent, just go on their own.
Same. I don't know. I mean, Southern Cal could have too. Really.
Yeah.
And I just see, like you said, I'm wondering, just curious. This is another theory or another thing to think about while we're here. Wonder why there aren't enough schools who think that way and say, why am I giving up all this control to a conference when I know I've got the brand? Why don't we just all agree to play each other and everybody figure out their own media deal? Why do we have to abdicate that to the conference dweebs?
Well, a lot of things continue to happen because they just have always been that way. So nobody thinks to break free from it or has the courage to do so.
Yep. So some point, I think that realization is going to come. The light's turning on, and it's just we give too much control to some people who don't really deserve the control. And I get it. Big Ten, SEC, kudos. The leadership there finally exercised the power. But some of these others, why are you giving them up? Why are you giving up your life or your, I wouldn't call it lifeline, but it's a lot of control for something that you can control yourself. So I don't know. We'll see if it works out. But I wanted to call in and say hi and good to talk to you.
Absolutely. I also think that there would be a difficulty in distributing money? Because obviously Clemson has to play other teams, and how do you value those other teams? Like, what do they make out of that contract?
Yeah, that is the catch, because they're going to have to play. If they play other good teams that can command that kind of an audience, they're going to play a hardest schedule. I mean, you're talking about a strength of schedule.
Mhm.
They're going to play the hardest strength of schedule, because that's the only teams that would be in that same category, right? So Southern Cal, Notre Dame, Clemson, Florida State, Ohio State. If they did that, they would be. That's the kind of people they'd have to play. They're not going to play FAU, Furman.
Yeah.
That. So anyway, that's well, they may get one or two, but they ain't going to
Sure.
get the rest of the schedule is going to be really hard. So
And
that's the other side.
And from an organizational standpoint, I just can't imagine. I guess if it would benefit them, they would go for it. But if ESPN, just to have, instead of 5 contracts with 5 conferences, they would have like 48 contracts, that, because right now we know what the stipulations are with each conference.
Yeah,
And they have a structure of when those games are scheduled, versus trying to figure out, okay, we got 48 different contracts with different teams, and trying to prioritize who gets the time slots. So this
the
contract says
mechanics
this,
are
and this
harder.
contract says that.
Yeah, the mechanics are a lot harder, but I think sometimes because it's harder, it means that we don't do it. I think sometimes the teams that have the cachet should try to do more on their behalf than just give it up as easily as they do. But we'll see. It'll be fun to watch. I actually think it's the best soap opera we've had in 25 years.
Absolutely.
It's great. All right, man.
All right, Huffer Billy.
All right, man.
It's good to see you. Thanks for calling.
Here. Mm-hmm.
All right, we will keep it moving right here at the Voice of College Football. Next on the line, we've got Will, who, of course, from the Notre Dame perspective, jumps into these conference affiliation conversations. Will, what's going on?
I think that was really fun what Huffer Billy said about Clemson going independent. Like, I don't know like what kind of deal they could get, but that would really shake things up. And then maybe like other schools would do it too. Like Miami would go independent. That would be crazy.
Now, if they were the only one to go independent, then from a scheduling standpoint, they would run into the same issue that Notre Dame has. Although Notre Dame's obviously navigated it very well, and they've got a contract with the ACC now that plugs in 5 of the 12 games. Whereas we used to see BYU struggle every year, where the front part of their schedule looked like a legit schedule for 4 weeks. And then as soon as all the conferences start to play their own conference games, they've got nobody to play. And they're like scrapping together Utah State and Wagner and whomever else to play the rest of the season. So Clemson, I would think, would have less difficulty, but still they would have a puzzle to put together in terms of trying to figure out who's available for the rest of the season. Because the ACC is sure not going to, make it easy on their teams to schedule Clemson for the rest of the season.
Do you think maybe the Big 12 and Pac-12 would be more? Do you think they could do like a mix of those teams, or do you think that are they locked into only playing conference games once conference season starts?
Well, just look at the schedules. Basically, everyone's playing conference games after the last week of September, but there are a few exceptions here and there, and most of those are reserved for playing Liberty, or there's just not that many opportunities. But Clemson's a different deal. They could probably, I don't know. I'm just trying to think, when the Big Ten, they're all playing each other. The SEC, they're all playing each other except for their week off before their rivalry week, and none of those teams want to play Clemson that week. So a lot of things would have to change for them to be able to build a schedule. Now, the Big 12 may want to play a Clemson or the Pac-12 just for that name brand game.
Like Washington, Clemson, Oregon, Clemson. Like, people would watch that game for sure.
Yeah, if the Pac-12 could supplement their television deal, their own conference deal, by supplementing, just like I was talking with Hufferbelly, the tricky part is now we've got conferences and the structure of the payouts and the distribution is very organized. But if you've got Clemson, that Notre Dame game's worth 50 times more than them playing the Citadel the next week. So how do you pay the opponent? You're going to have to figure that out. But the Pac-12 would want to get in on that to supplement their deal. If they've got 6 games against Clemson, that'd be a pretty good payout, I would think, for them.
So if the ACC like does their grander rights, does that mean they could also add a team if they wanted to, if they change their grander rights, or is that not how that works?
Wow. I see the guy that's on the line that could certainly answer that question. Here you go, Will. Let's bring on our guy, Tony Syracusa from Last Word on College Football. Tony, I hope you've not been waiting there for too long. I just caught you out of my corner of my eye. How you doing today?
I'm good. You can hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine. Thanks for jumping on here.
All right.
Will has this question.
I was wondering if the ACC could add a school if they change up their grander rights with like Clemson and the revenue sharing.
It takes 75% approval from the existing members to add another school. We have reported really last fall that there are a couple of schools that will hold their vote hostage in exchange for renegotiating the grant of rights, because they look at it as a way to, not be held hostage so much, by this ridiculous document that goes on for, ad infinitum. But it requires a 75% approval from the existing conference members.
I was only asking this because, like, maybe in 3 years, if Jim Moore Jr. and UConn keep getting better, they might try to join the ACC, just because it would help it wouldn't kill their basketball program like joining the American did. Right. And maybe they could at least go 6-6 in football and then really help boost the conference in basketball.
Yeah, I mean, and it would be a significant boost for basketball for UConn to join. I mean, they would certainly be in the top 25% of the conference on a regular basis, just by being there. What Mora does with UConn football, still TBD, because Jim Mora is, as I know Jim Mora from my UCLA coverage days, Jim's trying to rebuild his own name and reputation, and I don't know how long he'll be at UConn. You get a couple another bowl games out of him, and you've probably maxed out what you're going to get out of Jim before he hits town for his next best offer.
Yeah, because I know they're getting better, but I don't know how long he'll stay there, or if they can another decent head coach to go up.
Well, and they're getting better because, as we like to say around here, you can't fall off the floor. They had the year where they didn't play in 2020 and got recognition for sitting out the COVID year, when reality was they had just left their previous conference a year early, went independent for a year, and didn't have anybody to play, because during COVID, everybody was just playing conference schedules, and they were now without a conference. So they didn't have anyone to play. So they hit rock bottom, and Mora has pulled them up from rock bottom. And I like Jim. He's a good coach. He's an interesting guy to cover, because everything he says to the media, he says with a purpose, and you realize he's planting stories a good part of the time. But he's a good guy. He's a good coach, and so it's UConn's a possibility, but they're going to have to show their monetary value to the ACC before anything gets made, because while Mark and I have been working on stuff together for years, and we love talking college football and the players and the games and the rivalries and all that, it is right now with realignment, everything is about money. Everything's about who's bringing what to the table revenue wise. So UConn's got some work to do before they get there.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I know you guys are probably going to continue going more analytically here, so I'm going to let you guys do that. And thanks for your time again, Mark.
Thanks, Will. Tony, we've got a question coming in here from Granddad. Granddad, thank you so much for the contribution. Appreciate that. Tony, are Louisville and Pittsburgh holding their vote hostage in exchange for a spot in the Big 12?
I cannot verify that. We have talked to people in athletic departments at schools that want to renegotiate the grant of rights, and they don't want, they're gonna play their game with a vote if someone else wants to come in. I do not have that it's Louisville and Pittsburgh, so I'm not going to say no, but I can't say yes either because I can't confirm it.
So, Tony, I don't know if you've had a chance to go through the article that kind of spurred this conversation in this live stream for us. I'll get your initial take before I dive into some specifics that I've done my best to address, but we are glad to have you here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, look, I mean, Dennis is right in that the ACC model for the grant of rights was built off the Big 12, and for the same reason, trying to hold the conference together. When the ACC one was done with the previous commissioner, Swafford, it was done because, ironically enough, while the ACC had picked off Syracuse and picked off Boston College, purged other conference members, they were now under attack. They were going to be pillaged themselves, and this was a way to hold it together. They went in an extreme. I think we can all agree on that. A grant of rights through 2036, I've said it repeatedly, is beyond absurd. So I get the purpose of it. It's the terms and the end result where we are now, or not the end result, the middle result where we are now with the ACC. But you look at what happened with the Big 12, and Texas and Oklahoma wound up waiting. Instead of giving up ownership of their broadcast rights and leaving 2 years ago, they waited until the end, and it was over, and they could pay their exit fee, and ESPN and the school would be able to have all of their broadcast rights where they belong. With the ACC, Florida State can pay $120 million to leave, but the ACC is still going to hold the broadcast rights to their home games. So 6 of their games every year. And as we just talked about, everything is about money and the revenue. If you don't own your broadcast rights, you hold limited value to whatever conference you're going to go to. I realize I'm the only one in the country who still thinks this gets litigated next year when the Big Ten, when there's been so much reaction that if they could litigate, they would have already. And I think that's just a false narrative. You have to have a cause of action in order to create a lawsuit. You can't just say, we're mad, we're going to sue. There has to be a specific cause of action. And with the phrasing of that very convoluted grant of rights, and again, it's your show, I came prepared, it's right there, that there is the clause of the conference providing valuable benefit, and the contract, the agreement, providing valuable benefits to each member institution of the conference. So next year, when every school in the Big Ten, including Maryland and Rutgers, is making twice as much in their TV deal as Clemson, it's no longer to Clemson's benefit. It's no longer to Florida State's benefit. Now you have a cause of action that you didn't have before, when the pay scales were relatively even across the conferences. Now we're talking about a $30 million per year gap. That's not small. That's not some small pittance that just gets overlooked. $30 million a year. And that Big Ten contract is going to come up and get renewed. There will be a new one before the ACC grant of rights is done. There will be a new SEC contract. There will be a new Big 12 contract. Pac-12 may still be trying to negotiate a contract. We don't know. But that gap is going to grow in the coming years. And so that creates a potential cause of action. There's nothing you can do about it right now. There really isn't. This group of 7 or group of 8 that, was throwing a temper tantrum at Amelia Island at the conference meetings doesn't really amount to much. It was a family squabble about where to eat dinner, is what it amounted to. And, the ACC sending me, me along with all the rest of the media, their email last night about their new agreement, which is an agreement to have an agreement about things that, we're going to agree upon later on because the details are non-existent. Whatever. We know what it is. There is no longer going to be balanced or even revenue sharing for postseason play, whether it's basketball or football. So if you're Florida State and you got $2 million for winning the Chick-fil-A Bowl, you're now going to get $1 million of it, and the other $1 million is going to be distributed amongst everybody else. Or, if you're Wake Forest and you won the Gasparilla Bowl, you get $500,000 out of the $900,000 payout, and the other school split, and that's fine. That's great. That makes sense. It's probably the way it should be. But you're talking about moving dimes on the dollar. You're talking about you're going to get an extra $1 million per year when the gap with the Big Ten is $30 million a year. It's putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs major surgery. And so it's nice because after all the fighting, you get the kumbaya and everybody is all well and good and everybody agrees to it. But whatever the plan winds up being also requires 10 yes votes out of the entire conference. So ask yourself this. If you're, and I'm picking on schools, I get it. I'm sorry if you're a fan of someone I'm picking on. If you're Boston College and you were getting an even amount before, and now you're going to get cut in half so that Florida State's happy, what's your motivation to say yes? Except, and this is what Florida State is counting on, and this is what Clemson, and this is what Jim Phillips is counting on, the internal acknowledgement, you got nowhere else to go. You're going to take it because what's your other option? Where else are you going to go, Syracuse? Where else are you going to go, Wake Forest? You got nowhere else to go. So you're going to vote yes. There is going to be, I feel confident in this. Michael Alford, the AD at Florida State, is going to be calling the AD at Boston College and saying, look, we'll find a way to sweeten a pot for you somewhere down the line. We need your yes vote on this. It's going to be like the floor of Congress, the floor of the Senate, doing some bargaining for some votes from the bottom 4, bottom 5 revenue wise of the conference, the least successful programs, because this is about revenue and it's about the money. When I was reading the article that you sent me from Dennis Dodd, I had on my TV in the office the ACC baseball tournament. Hey, there's Wake Forest, number 1 in the country. It's huge. But how much money are you going to get out of the baseball program? Sure, you sell out most of your home games, and that's great. It doesn't compare to the basketball revenue for March Madness or the postseason college football revenue. So those two things are really going to be the driving force. Wake Forest won the national championship in women's golf last night. That's great. And they're going to make a big deal out of it, as they should. There's no money in it. This is a football and basketball and maybe women's basketball conversation to be had because it's about revenue and nothing else.
Because if those backroom kind of conversations aren't had, you really only have a handful of schools that are going to have to do the math to figure out whether this is going to benefit them or not.
That's it.
you've got a handful of schools that know this is not benefiting us. We don't want this. Then you get a handful that says we don't need to do the math. We're Florida State. We know we've got a yes vote. As I joked earlier, Louisville may get a check for $787 or something because they might just be, there's a glut of schools that I don't know where they stand on the postseason distribution of money, but it's pretty close.
Maybe you remember and this is really taking a pivot, but maybe you remember the movie Moneyball about the Oakland A's, and at some point, the Billy Bean character, the Brad Pitt, he's negotiating a trade, and he said, "Oh, there's one more thing. I want you to fill my soda machine in the locker room for the next 3 years because the A's were making the players pay for their sodas." Said, so he's on the phone with the Giants or whomever it was. I want you to fill my soda machine for the next 3 years. That's the phone call Florida State's going to be making to Boston College. Look, we'll pick up some of your tab for whatever, your training expenses, your, whatever it may be, your food, your trainer's fees, whatever it may be. We'll help pick up some of the tab. We need your yes vote on this. There is going to have to be some of that in order to get to the 10 votes, the 10 yes votes.
We invite everyone to check out Tony's work at Last Word on College Football and all the rest of the fine folks there that have helped us and supported us through the years. So Last Word on College Football should be a regular stop for all of you. Tony, we've got a question coming in from Antoine. Antoine, thank you so much for your support. Is it possible for the best of the ACC and the best of the Pac-12 to consolidate, or the Pac to consolidate the best of them for survival purposes?
3 months ago, I would have said no. Now, I think everything has to be on the table. And whether it's an actual merger, conference merger, or whether it's some sort of competitive agreement in terms of scheduling each other so that you've got that additional big game revenue. And to your point, Antoine, it does only work with the top of the conference. No one's gonna fill the stadium to see Boston College against Washington State. I feels like I keep picking on Boston College, but you get my point. But look, if there's a Clemson versus Washington or whatever the case may be, then sure, it's possible. Like I said, I don't know if there is the temerity with George Kliavkoff right now to do it. Kliavkoff, the Pac-12 has got a boatload of problems as we sit here today. And I mean a boatload. They have no TV contract for starting next year yet. All of the ADs were talking publicly about it'd be done by end of March. We're now near end of May, and it isn't done. ESPN this week said that they are out as a potential tier one partner. They'll still be in the mix somewhere, but as a tier one, you have Kliavkoff wants a grant of rights because he's trying to hold the conference together. He's looking at a 3, 4, maybe 5-year grant of rights deal. Washington has already said, yeah, we got issues with that until we see what the TV contract is. So there's kind of a chicken and egg, which is going to happen first. Are they going to get a grant of rights agreement, if not in writing, based on what the TV contract is, or do they have to have the TV contract first? You've got a problem with the value of the TV contract because you've got to replace the LA schools. And to this point, everybody has talked about San Diego State, and then whether it be SMU, Tulane, whoever else, you've got a problem with San Diego State right now, a very significant one. In order for them to leave in time for next season, the 2024 season, their buyout from the Mountain West is $17 million right now. That's fine. On July 1st, it triples to $51 million. That's a problem. And especially when you're talking about, you may not have the TV contract done by then. The TV networks want to know who they're going to get. Are we having 10 schools? Are you going to, who are the replacements? What markets is it going to be? None of the schools want to sign a grant of rights until they see the TV deal. There's a significant problem. And while this sounds tertiary to Kliavkoff's issues, more financial problems. The Pac-12 has now moved out of its very expensive San Francisco headquarters, which they were paying just an unruly sum of money for every month because Larry Scott was convinced that would bring in some great sponsors. It brought in none. And they've kind of broken everything up. A lot of people working remotely from home. The production studios are out in the suburbs now because they're going to be dealing with streaming companies once the Pac-12 network folds at the end of next year. The problem, though, is what they did to the building when they moved in. It was an office building that they were leasing, but they built TV studios, edit bays, production studios. Mark, you know what that looks like in your days at ESPN. You know what it looks like. The company that owns the building now wants $10 million in the contract from the Pac-12 for putting the offices back the way they were and into functioning office building. And the Pac-12 is asking all the schools to chip in on that. So, there's $1 million per school. It doesn't sound like much, except you don't know what's coming down the pike for a new TV contract. Right now, the estimates are it could be 25 to 30 million for a new TV contract. That's a $15 million per year haircut from what you previously had. The Pac-12, owe Comcast $50 million because you were overbilling them for your delivery on Comcast over a 10-year period, and an audit years after the fact found that out. All the schools are having to chip in to get Comcast their money back. Washington State, a couple days ago, the president of the school issued a statement, hiring freeze on everything, including athletics. No unnecessary expenditures. Because they're a public school, they are preparing the state for the budget that's about to come that's going to show a deficit. So they put a freeze on everything, which I guess if you're a coach, you've got job security because they can't afford the buyout. Kliavkoff has got a lot of problems right now. And to Antoine's point, it would go a long way to create some sort of at least competitive partnership with the ACC, at least the top end of the conference.
And I've got so many directions to go here, Tony. I want to respect your time, so just let me know when you need to leave. We do have some other questions coming in here, but to wrap up the Pac-12 portion of this, because when we had you on last week, we let you go, and at that point I thought, man, I would love to get Tony in on this Pac-12 deal because I've had so many various thoughts about this. So I'll just conclude with this. The optics to me don't favor the Pac-12 for a few obvious reasons. Number one, it appears as though, and this is easy for me to say at this point, that instead of waiting until the networks filled up inventory from other conferences, they should have been proactive, knowing, I think Kliavkoff overestimated the value of the conference. They should have been proactive to get to stake their claim with these networks first and foremost, even if it wasn't at the number that he wanted. Number two, in negotiations, you know better than I do, whether personally involved or observing it from afar, the longer it drags on, the more vulnerable the lesser of the two parties is. Because the Pac-12 needs media partners. These media partners, they don't need the Pac-12.
Correct.
They can just continue on with their business. And sure, we'd love to have Pac-12 football. It'd be a nice little addition for Apple TV or for Amazon, but they're not in the business of Pac-12 football or college football. They're running a business and doing just fine without the Pac-12. So so the level of desperation or this situation just, to me, is just escalating by the week.
I think all of those things you say are completely true. I mean, this is the ghost of Larry Scott, when we remember that ESPN went to him and said, we want to partner with you on the Pac-12 network. We'll take over all of the operating costs. We'll take over all of the overhead in exchange for revenue share, where we're going to get, I think it was 65%. And Larry Scott said, no, we're better off going it on our own. And the conference continues to pay the price for that, because ESPN would have been a partner for decades, right? In the Pac-12 network was, Larry, for those not privy to everything the Pac-12 network was, it was not, when you watch the SEC network, you have your channel there, the SEC network. The Pac-12 network was a bunch of regional stations with then a mothership network, if you will. There was the Pac-12 network LA, Pac-12 network Arizona, Pac-12 network Northwest, all of these things, and then the actual Pac-12 network itself. Scott was demanding that any of the carriers, whether it be Dish Network or Uverse or AT&T or whomever, carry all of them. You couldn't just get the network. You had to carry all of them. And DirecTV never signed on. And then when AT&T bought DirecTV, Larry Scott figured, all right, we're going to be good because Uverse has it and AT&T owns Uverse. Now we'll get it on DirecTV. AT&T went the other way. They pulled it off Uverse and never signed in with DirecTV. So the hubris with which he operated continues to haunt the conference. I think Kleofkoff came in from the entertainment industry, the sports entertainment industry, having negotiated a lot of deals, working at MGM Resorts, figuring, it was fixable. I don't think he knew all of the problems that were behind the curtain. That's on him. That's a due diligence issue. And that's a little bit, at least a little bit on him. That's a lot of bit on Scott. And then Kleofkoff got blindsided by the UCLA and USC departures. He absolutely did not see it coming. He was told the morning the decision, well, it wasn't even announced, it was leaked. John Wilner from the San Jose Mercury News got it out there. Kleofkoff found out about 2 hours before that, and then the schools came out that night and acknowledged it, with their announcements. So not much has gone right in the Kleofkoff era. It's been all of 2 years, not even 2 full years, year and a half. Some of it his doing, a lot of it not his doing, but he should have been jumping, to your point, at any inkling, any interest, any sit down, any conversation with any TV network. He should have been the first one at the table.
Yeah,
because he did overvalue what was left. You can't replace UCLA and USC with San Diego State and SMU. It's not the same thing. Even within the Dallas market, it's the Dallas media market, and SMU is fine, but you can't assume that SMU owns the Dallas media market. It does not. It's still, even though it's far away from Austin, there's still a lot of UT fans in the city of Dallas. Heck, there are a lot of TCU fans, from Fort Worth hedging their way, over in Dallas. You cannot replace it with San Diego State. It's a nice program. It's a commuter school that, built a new stadium, and it can expand, I think, to 50,000. And it's nice, but it's nowhere near the media draw. San Diego is not the media draw that Los Angeles is. So again, you're putting Band-Aids on a gaping wound, but that's what he's got to work with right now is Band-Aids.
Tony, we've got a few questions here coming in from the chat, and I warn you on the first one. So we read all super chats unless they're abusive in some way.
Fair enough.
So they may not be based in reality. So we've got our buddy Jimmy Touchdown saying, "I'm still baffled that the Big Ten would add a directional JUCO school like USC. Did Michigan and Ohio State need a basement dweller to run up the scores in November?"
Let me say something about Ohio State and Michigan in November, because this has come to light in the past few days. We've discovered the Big Ten contracts, the TV contracts, don't really exist. They are unsigned. Kevin Warren was promising things that he was not empowered to promise, and thus they're not signed. NBC, in order to give in its money, wanted some primetime games in November as you're in crunch time and conference play. And it turns out there was a gentleman's agreement. Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State didn't want to have to play night games outdoors in the fall. What are you kidding me? What happened to big, tough Midwest football? Come on. I mean, the Michigan State has given up a home game now against Penn State. The game's been moved indoors to Ford Field in Detroit so that they don't have to play outside in the cold. So, say what you want about SC and call them a directional JUCO, whatever. But, my impression of Michigan and Ohio State and Michigan State and Penn State dropped when I've had they don't want to play outdoors at night.
Absolutely right. Gene Smith, athletic director at Ohio State, when this 12-team playoff was talked about, he discussed rather than playing home campus games, finding like playing a home playoff game in Indianapolis. Like this is Ohio State Big Ten football,
right?
And you don't want to fill your stadium with 110,000 and build a home field advantage. You want to go to Indianapolis 2 hours.
That's because he didn't want to play in the snow. He didn't want to have to play in the snow in December. Whatever.
That's weak.
That
is really weak. And I will say, before we get to the next question, Ohio State and Michigan fans, you may want to temper your shots at USC in particular, because let's understand, while Ohio State could be argued to be the best and most consistent elite program of all time, or the last 20, 50 years, whatever you want to, they can certainly state that claim. USC at its peak, when they hit those peak Pete Carroll, John Robinson, John McKay, like all-time teams.
John McKay, wow.
Those are difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
All right, we've got Jason. Thank you for being here. Jason says, Tony, do you think eventually Florida State and Clemson both apply to join the Big Ten with this significant lower pay?
It's interesting. I think whoever, if there is a breakup of the ACC in any capacity, whether it's those two teams you mentioned, Jason, or whether it's more teams, they're not going to be full share revenue teams when they go in, just because the new Big Ten contracts have escalator clauses in them. The money goes up if more teams are added. How much it goes up is dependent upon which teams are added. The biggest escalator clause is if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten. The revenue that gets spread around to everybody goes up significantly. So I want to make sure we understand it's not more teams sharing the same size pie. That pie actually grows. Nonetheless, no one's going to vote a full share for Florida State or Clemson right away. I don't know that the Big Ten is the best fit for them. I really don't. I know that it's going to be hard if it's the SEC for South Carolina to give a yes vote for Clemson to join that same conference, or get a yes vote from Florida. But I think there are enough other yes votes out there within the SEC to get approval for those two to join there, as opposed to the Big Ten. Remember, and I don't have the list in front of me, but remember the Big Ten is still very hung up on the AAU academic standards. And I'm not, denigrating Florida State or Clemson. I don't know if they're on that list. I don't have it in front of me, but that is a deal breaker for the Big Ten right now.
Yeah, I am in no way an expert on that topic either, although Florida State as a school, in terms of its school ranking, is right in that mid-range of a Big Ten school, and so is Miami. Now, in terms of AAU status, neither one of those schools has AAU status. Florida State is working toward theirs. I don't know about Clemson.
And there, look, if a conference wants them bad enough, and we go back to the topic, what does Florida State bring to the table? How much more revenue are they going to bring to the table for everybody else? Then, you make some, maybe you make some concessions. I mean, look, the Pac-12 has been hung up on the Carnegie Tier 1 schools for 40 years. I mean, since it was the Pac-8, it has been a mandate that you must be one. It's why BYU didn't get admitted back when they added Utah and Colorado. San Diego State, as of last year, is not a Carnegie Tier 1 school, which relies on postgraduate academics. However, the California State University system granted them the right to add some of these academic emphases, which now puts them in line to be a Carnegie Tier 1 school in 2 years, which the Pac-12 is going to accept and say, that's fine, that's close enough.
Larry is calling into the show, so maybe I could have him read his own super chat. So we'll put that on hold, Larry. Jimmy's coming back with this one. The ACC diluted itself with bottom feeders when it raided the Big East twice. When all is said and done, the ACC will be the old Big East, plus Wake Forest and Georgia Tech. West Virginia has the last laugh after decades of ACC snubs.
Yes and no. I mean, yes, they did dilute. The ACC did dilute itself with who it took and what it took, and it goes back to the conversation of knowing who you are within the conference. In other words, when this thing comes through with the agreement to have an agreement about whatever it is they're going to agree about with revenue, and you're Georgia Tech or whomever else, and that you're at the bottom of that pecking order, you're going to say yes to the agreement anyway, because really where Jimmy's point goes, if you extend it down a couple more steps, what else do you have? Where else are you going to go? There are options for some of the schools. There are even some of the middling schools. There are probably options for Virginia in the Big Ten, Duke, North Carolina, other schools to the SEC. So there are options for some, not options for all. So yeah, it is diluted, and that's why there is the grant of rights, because it is the one thing holding the conference together right now. But again, 2036 is unreasonable to expect that the conference is going to exist with its current TV deal, its current lineup of schools. It'll make it financially competitive with Conference USA or the MAC at that point.
And if we're really looking at the additions from the Big East, I think it's a mixed bag. It's certainly not been the top, but Miami is not a bottom feeder financially. They've not been the best on the field, but they've not been the worst. They've been a middling football performer in the last 15 years, a 55% winning percentage. But at the TV negotiating table, they're a top 3 to 4 school for that conference. That's been proven out. Louisville's actually been right there with Miami as a football draw on television. We saw the numbers coming in from the last 10 years, and Louisville and Miami were 3 and 4. So Louisville, a good addition. Virginia Tech, not a bad football on the field up until the last couple of years, or as a draw, not a bad addition. Now, something could be said in terms of Syracuse, both in terms of a TV draw and on the field performance. Pitt has, acquitted itself under Pat Narduzzi rather well on the field in regards to a TV draw, without knowing the numbers off the top of my head, even though we did a very in-depth TV rating series a few weeks ago. Pitt, I would think, would be pretty much null and void, not a positive or negative there. So I don't know. I agree with that statement to a certain extent, but I don't know that it's to the extent that he presents it there.
Well, and the old ACC really was a basketball conference, period. And it still really fancies itself as a basketball conference. It will always get more attention than football does. But the schools that got added more football relevance than what previously existed within the ACC.
Joey, thank you so much for the contribution. Joey simply just letting everyone know, South Carolina fans, Twisted Rooster will host the show tonight, meaning right here at the Voice of College Football on the main channel, simulcasting with the South Carolina channel. Twisted Rooster will have a South Carolina show for us tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So, George, if you could hang right there, Larry has delivered a super chat, and we'll just let Larry come on the line here and deliver his super chat. Larry, how you doing today?
Good. How are you guys?
Good.
So I'll read it and then I'll go into my explanation a little bit. I may be old school, but when I make an agreement, my word is my word. When your word can be bought, I don't have much respect for those types. And so a little background here. So I was a superintendent for a commercial contractor. You have a team, you sign a contract to go in with your team. There's a set money. And some jobs you'll make 1%, some you'll make 30%. If I've got a 30% project in front of me and I'm only going to make 1% on this project, I don't just get to leave my contract and say, well, tough luck, person, which would be ESPN, the person that's redeeming all of it, whether they got me at a good price or not. I signed on to that. And so I don't get to just jump and leave my team members on the hook to go do the job that's going to give me 30%. So I guess to me, it comes into your word is your word. If you sign a contract, you should hold to your contract. And if you got to tough it through, you got to tough it through. You can do what you want. I just don't have a lot of respect for people that do that. And I equated a lot to the business I was in, dealing with contracts, team players, architects, owners, stuff like that. So that's my stand.
I'm only going to hold Tony's rebuttal for one quick comment. It's almost like what we've grown accustomed to in professional sports. Player signs a contract for 5 years. He goes out and has a better than expected season. He wants renegotiated. If he goes out and has a less than expected season, where's the team's response to that? The organization ever is able to come back and say, we're paying you $10 million a year. You're valued at $3.5 million for hitting 225 the last 2 years, slicing your salary. It only works in one direction. Tony.
A couple things. One, I recognize Larry saying he may be old school. I think, Mark, you've known me for a handful of years. There are few people who are more old school than I am when it comes to college sports and what I grew up with and what I remember. If we're talking specifically about the ACC, yeah, you signed the contract. You signed it back in 2013. You signed a revised version of the grant of rights in 2016. Suck it up, buttercup, and live with it. And I get that. And I don't dispute that. But what I'm going to say is, in the modern reality with college athletic finances, if you suck it up until 2036 and take the significant financial hit that you're taking because you're not competitive with others, throw in the things that people didn't see coming in 2013 or to a lesser degree in 2016 with NIL money and other such elements that have infiltrated their way into college athletics, you will still have a football program. You'll still have a basketball program. You're going to start dropping, whether it's tennis or baseball, because you can't afford to compete at the same level as the other schools. There is going to be a downside to the school for sticking with it, because as the cost of doing business goes up and your cost of travel and your cost of running these programs goes up exponentially every year, and yet you're making the same money that you were making in 2016, some hard financial decisions have to be made. And so there is a price to be paid for an athletic director who is charged with having to keep 20 programs afloat or 15 athletic programs afloat within their school. There are some hard decisions that have to be made when it comes to things like that.
And that's a great point, because a reasonable inflation rate over the course of modern America is what, 3 to 4%, and we're seeing higher than that. And I think another point that I was going to make when we were talking the Pac-12 deal is I do think that a lot of these large media companies are seeing a recession we'll see if it happens or not, but a possible recession looming. And that was another reason why the Pac-12 needed to strike earlier.
Yeah.
Larry, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, Tony. And in our industry, in our business, it's the same thing. If we call it a low ball. If you low bid a project, well, if the project is going to take you 5 years, you should understand the economy you're in, the cost. You can't be specifically exact, but we have in our contracts, you have a 30-day window to accept the bid. You also have, if there's a material cost increase over a percentage, you pay the difference. Like, these are supposed to be professional people. And if you're going to run a successful business, then you have to take that into account. We're talking, these people are geniuses, I would think, that are running that conference.
Nope.
You can't, right. And you can't, like, for somebody to take a project that's going to take 15 years to build and keep it stagnant and keep it at the same pay rate for 15 years is just that's dumb. But the thing is, either you go under, which the ACC is not going to go under. They're just going to be that small contractor now. And now you've got the two big ones are getting better. You got to suck it up and rebuild when you get to that point. That's just the issue. They made stupid moves. You signed on it, but I get you. And I'm not accusing you of anything. Yeah. And I understand FSU and Clemson wanting to, make the bread and butter that they're worth.
Sure.
But I'm old school. I love Aaron Tippin. Stand for something. That's me.
No, look, I get it. And I agree with a lot with what you're saying. And conceptually, certainly, I agree with it conceptually. Look, you signed it, live with it. And to that degree, the conference schools are idiotic for signing a 20-year agreement when you had to know that there was going to be a revolution in the media industry. There would be, streaming services with their money to throw in. There would be all these other options. There would be a consolidation in other parts. The regional networks like Bally Sports, they filed for bankruptcy. So you had to know that there would be changes. And so signing a 20-year deal, as you say, was foolish. They did it. And look, the people who signed it, frankly, only probably half of them are still here. There's been a change in the president. The athletic directors don't sign these contracts. The school chancellors and presidents do. The guy who's the commissioner now is not the one who came up with this. Phillips is having to try and fix it and live with it and whatever. There's been a turnover in school presidents, and all of those things are the norm. So the people who are dealing with it now, some willingly, some less willingly, a good half of them had nothing to do with signing it to begin with, or certainly with drawing it up. I throw in this little sidebar for you, Mark. Let's not forget, as we talked about the Big Ten, and those contracts aren't even signed because Kevin Warren was promising things he was not entitled to promise. Let's remember who Tony Petitti, the new commissioner, is having to fix it. Let's remember who also applied and interviewed for that Big Ten commissioner's job, Jim Phillips. He wanted out of the ACC. And it's like, well, it turns out it was not so rosy at the Big Ten, at least right now either. And Phillips didn't get the job. And, it's a strange circle, definitely over the last 6 months. But like I said, I get the point. And conceptually, I agree. But with the here and now, nuts and bolts of it, there's going to have to be changes for the ACC to survive.
Well, appreciate you, Mark, and appreciate you, Tony. And I'll let you guys move on.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Larry.
you.
We appreciate it. I do think that even though I was very interested in the article that was posted by
Dennis
Keith
Dodd.
Hamill.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The Big Ten article.
Yep. Yeah.
To get the, behind the curtain look at all the things that went wrong and the negligence, basically, of Kevin
It
Warren.
was.
When it comes down to it, Tony, won't that just result in a lot of things that need to be cleaned up by Tony Petiti, but NBC and CBS, NBC is the one that's mostly in this situation, that they're going to get their product and the Big Ten's going to get its money and everything's going to work out. But yes, it wasn't the most ethical.
Everything is going to wash out fine. It's going to take a lot of horse trading by Petiti, like, moving the Michigan State, talking Michigan State into moving, the game so that NBC gets its primetime game and Michigan State doesn't have to play outside in November. Those kinds of things. There will be more of that. The conference has to fork over $50 million to Fox, because one of the biggest oops that happened in this was NBC wanted one of the conference championship games in one of the years of the contract. And Kevin Warren said, sure, 2026, it's yours. The problem was, it wasn't Kevin Warren's to give away. The Big Ten Network owns the rights to the conference championship game, and the Big Ten Network is owned by, Fox. So in order to keep NBC happy, Fox is saying, yes, we'll give it up for that 1 year, but you owe us the $50 million we anticipate we could have made off of that. And all of the schools are having to kick in to help pay for that. And if you're these schools, you're like, wait a minute, this isn't what, there's got to be a different way to do this. But as of right now, the schools are going to be the ones kicking in. Strangely enough, UCLA and USC, which have signed their contracts to be members, but don't even have a TV contract yet with anybody, and they got to kick in a couple million each, to resolve this.
That is the point in all of this that I was the most mystified about, is the audacity of giving away a game to a television network that's under contract.
Yeah,
elsewhere.
To somebody else. You gotta wonder, because this, at least the tail, these negotiations have been ongoing for, a year. You have to wonder, though, at least in the last half of the negotiations, while Kevin Warren was interviewing to become the president of the Chicago Bears, if he didn't just at least have, 1 foot out the door and was like, you need this to sign? Sure. You need this to wrap up the deal? Because look at all the accolades Kevin Warren got walking out the door, because we didn't know all this stuff, right? Hey, got this massive TV deal and they're fighting it out with the SEC, and they got the LA schools to leave for the Big Ten, and they got the LA market. Look at what Kevin Warren did. Wow, this is great. And then Tony Petiti comes in. He's looking at the paperwork, raising his hand saying, guys, we got a little problem over here. Meanwhile, Kevin Warren is sitting there wondering if Justin Fields is, his legit quarterback for next year.
Yeah, it almost seems like Kevin Warren walked away thinking, I know I've left some, to be kind, is some details left unattended, but that $7 billion justifies everything.
Right.
So
yeah,
I'm going to go into Big Ten history as a legend and a hero regardless. So,
and it's almost like during the transition, he didn't warn anybody. It's almost like he didn't say, hey, listen, here's my departing memo. On my way out the door, I want to let you know, here's what still needs to be done over here and here and here. Tony Petiti, hadn't even unpacked his box, hadn't even figured out where the executive men's room was yet. And the guy's faced with, this mutiny, because he's got schools that are mad that they've got to pay this money to Fox. They've got, the gentleman's agreement to not play night games in November has been violated, and Fox is pissed off. So it was a lot for him to have to walk into.
And considering the location of those two entities, meaning the Chicago Bears and the Big Ten office, they might be rubbing shoulders at a deli, soon, and sharing some dirty looks or something.
Yeah, they're going to see each other in their Starbucks run at some point.
All right, Tony, we've got a call coming in from our buddy George. George is one of our longest time viewers here. George, appreciate you being here. Thanks for waiting.
Hey,
George,
how's it going?
There you are. Doing well. What's on your mind?
I just had to type into the chat. I just had to say to the chat, I'm on. I made it.
You did.
Never
Thank you
mind.
for waiting. Do you have anything for myself or Tony?
It's fine. That Tony Syracusa is something else, isn't he?
I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'll take it.
He is something else. That's why
No,
he
he's
gets a
like you.
frequent call
He's
from
like
me.
you. He's like you.
Well, I don't know if he wants to hear that, but
That's why Mark and I have been working together in one capacity or another for about 5 or 6 years now.
you may need to explain, or you could ask us.
You know what
question,
we
George.
should do? Once a week, we should have a show. It's called A Show About Nothing, where you guys come on and we talk about other shit. Like, what about the price of gas or something? Yeah.
Okay.
Get everybody in trouble.
Yes, it probably would get us in trouble. So I do my best to stay away from that. We talk college football here. I'm sure Tony and I could have a rather interesting and entertaining.
It would be a blast, wouldn't it? Until you got turned off, shut down. Anyway.
All right, George, do you have anything for us?
All right. So on the football level, Missouri just passed a law in a state legislature that they can do NIL with their kids, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And they can give high school kids NIL deals if they agree to commit to Missouri. Now, there's still a lot of legal loopholes in there. Maybe they could play 1 year or sign and not play and transfer. But I think that's a great freaking idea, man. Let's pay the 8th graders, you know? Let's get them involved.
Yeah, NIL has, I mean, goodness, we could do 3 hours on NIL. There are, and Mark, you and I talked about this when the change was made. Charlie Baker being the new president of the NCAA, there were a lot of people who wrote him off early on, saying, "Oh, you know, he's not going to accomplish anything because he's spending all of his time with Congress." That is why Charlie Baker was hired. Missouri has its new law. Colorado is about to put in force a law that the schools are actually allowed to handle the NIL themselves, which the NCAA rules had barred them from. You've got multiple states who have signed legislation which allows their schools to give the middle finger to the NCAA when it comes to NIL rules, and you only have to follow the state laws. Those laws, while people applaud them, are grotesquely unfair because they go to the schools that are within the jurisdiction of the state. In other words, when Arkansas signed that, it's valid for the public universities in Arkansas. It doesn't apply to the private universities, many of which are HBCU schools, because those don't fall within the jurisdiction of the State Department of Education. So, you know, there's a lot of saber rattling. There are some pieces of legislation that are working their way through. Look, no one in their right mind. Mark knows this. He's heard this story a million times. My first college football game was in 1972, and I've been hooked ever since. No one is ever going to sit there and say college sports are in trouble, the NCAA is in trouble, but oh, thank goodness, here comes the United States Congress. They'll fix it. No one in their right mind is ever going to say that. There has never been a taste of willingness from Congress to get involved until now. Lindsey Graham has a bill that is going to would rein in NIL because it would create an oversight within Congress. I'm not in favor of Congress having an oversight. I am in favor of the NCAA having that oversight, but you have to give the NCAA some teeth. The NCAA has been paralyzed for 5 years because they acted with such hubris when they could have negotiated with the schools and the athletes. Mark Emmert sat there and said, Go ahead, sue us. I'm not worried about it. And then they got their butts handed to them twice in the Supreme Court. It paralyzed them. They don't have the ability to act now because they fear these lawsuits. What I told Mark months ago on one of his shows, which I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm saying we're getting closer to it, is the NCAA is going to sign off on Congress taking over the oversight of the NCAA and college athletics in exchange for antitrust protection. So that, and it's going to be limited antitrust protection, but it's going to protect the NCAA from these constant lawsuits. So the NCAA can enforce rules and do things without the threat of being sued constantly. That's kind of where Lindsey Graham's bill goes. And it works to get the collectives out of the game because it's going to eliminate the boosters being able to put this money in, which was never what NIL was intended to be. But in the meantime, you have 50 states making 50 different laws, which is a problem because there's never been parity in college athletics, but there has to be an attempt at equity. You can't have the equity when you have 50 states making 50 different laws. There are several states that allow high school athletes to get NIL if they can. California is one of them. There are several. So there are a handful of high school athletes making a few $100 here and there from the local burger place to go do sponsorships for them or whatever. It's never much money. I think we also have to take into account that the stories we see on social media about money, the amounts of money for some of these athletes is hogwash. That kid at Florida was never offered $11 million. It's what his family asked for. There is no proof, anything in writing ever, that there was an agreement for $11 million. The quarterback from California went to Tennessee allegedly for $8 million. Didn't happen. Yeah, he's going to Tennessee, but it ain't for $8 million. Not even remotely close. And ironically enough, they both have the same NIL agent, a lawyer in California who has been in trouble with the state bar more than a few times. His last name is Caspino. And there's no proof. Media has gone to him. We've gone to him and said, show us the contract. And what he does is he says, well, here's what it would look like. I'll show you a sample contract. Now, where is the It's not there. So I always advise be skeptical when these huge numbers are thrown out. Believe it when the boosters have a grotesque amount of involvement, because they do. Steve Sarkisian is having his starting quarterback dictated to him because the boosters and the collective have given so much money to Quinn Ewers. You know, you darn well better start him if you know what's good for your future as the head coach of Texas. But also, you know, keep an eye on the granular is always my advice. I know it can, you know, make your eyes bleed sometimes, but the details in this matter, because I see so many people on social media, and I had to back off so many of these conversations with NIL attorneys and agents, because the conversation became, let's just head to free agency for college athletes and negotiate, you know, with them as a collective, as a union, headed towards, you know, them becoming employees. Look, it's one thing to throw these out in theory, but once you get to the details are everything. When you look at the details and you do reading, like, I mean, we actually have a couple of attorneys that we work with at Last Word on College Football who help us go through the contracts and advise us what it means and so on. So it's not just Tony, the football writer, doing it, but you want to make them employees. Everybody who plays for Utah, for the Utes, is going to have to give up their NIL money, because the employment law in the state of Utah does not allow state employees to make extra money by being a Utah employee. In other words, you can't market yourself as the Utah employee for extra money. So, hey, the Utah players got to give up their NIL if you want to be an employee. It's not as simple as just what some of these guys on social media make it out to be. There are a lot of absolutists out there, and I'm here to say there is no absolute answer to this in either direction. You're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. I like NIL for what it was intended to be. I like what Ed O'Bannon fought for. If you're going to make money off my name, I get a cut of it. That's fine. If you're going to get the running back from Texas who's going to go to a local car dealership and he gets a car and some money for doing the endorsements, that's fine. That's what NIL is for. Every one of us in this country has the right to ownership of our name, image, and likeness. The athletes should as well. It's the collectives, it's the boosters, it's the agents that have totally thrown it off the rails from what it should have been. And that is a pretty high soapbox that I just got off of.
No, I love it. There's a lot of great stuff there. And before George says anything else, I just wanted to say, to extend on your point about the numbers that are out there on NIL, I just read an article in The Athletic that was anonymously interviewing 8 prominent high school football coaches in the Big Ten footprint that all addressed NIL, that said, yes, those numbers that you see, and these are the top schools and the top players going to Big Ten schools, that said the numbers aren't what you're seeing out there.
I saw that. I read that same article. The other thing too is when you look at the collectives in the last 12 months, 30 collectives have folded. They either were non-functioning, they didn't get the job done, they flipped from 501c3s to for-profit, but 30 of them have shut down already because it's just not the way the system was. And all these schools decided to have a collective. Look, I during the football season, I spend all those hours every week at Wake Forest, right? And I will tell you that they have a huge expansion going on in their football training facilities. And as of 2 months ago, they were still collecting the pledges to finish paying for that. Do you want the NIL? Do you want these people to donate to the NIL or your football facilities? You can't have both. It's one or the other. And Wake Forest is not alone in that. The football coaches are split when you talk to them. Would they rather have the NIL money or would they rather finish expanding their facilities? So that's why I say the global theoretical conversation that you see on social media with a lot of the NIL lawyers and stuff, it's a waste of time. Look at the granular, read the articles like the one in The Athletic that did a great job talking about the reality of the numbers, because that's the stuff that matters.
George, do you have anything else for us?
Yeah. I do, definitely.
Yes, sir.
Well, if things are going to keep on this road we're going on, I would like to suggest to the Florida Gator football team, hurry up and make a deal with BlackRock Stadium at Florida Field, Steve Spurrier locker room. I want BlackRock on my corner, in my corner. And Vanguard, BlackRock Vanguard Stadium.
Okay. All right, George. We appreciate you.
So what do you think about my idea? If Miami of Ohio beats Miami on the first game of the year, I'm going to buy everybody even remotely associated with the team a free ribeye steak dinner. Go Miami of Ohio.
All right, Bobcats.
Yes.
I thought this was a football show.
This is a football show. Absolutely. We do our best to stay in the football lane, but this is dominating football right now. But yes, Miami of Ohio over Miami. We've got your early season upset prediction and ribeye steaks for all of
for everybody,
the Red
even
Hawks
remotely associated with the team.
Okay.
Every time I'm on here, I think about Aaron Tippin, Hank Williams, John Denver. You know what I mean? This is a good, wholesome football show. I like this.
Okay. It is. We do our best to keep it above board and clean for the most part. You know, not
we're all a
brutish,
bunch
but
of
clean.
country boys. We just want our football.
That's it. All right, George. We're going to keep it moving. Thanks, man. Appreciate you being
somebody
here.
let me know. Is women's Rutgers water polo going to USC every year now? What's going on with these conference mergers? Are
We're a
we
football
flying
show.
the
You just
USC
said that.
lacrosse team to? I just
There are a
can't.
lot of logistics that need
I'm
to be
worried
worked
about.
out. That's my best answer.
I'm worried about cow farts, and I just gave up my gas stove. And now you're telling me we're sending USC women's volleyball to Rutgers? I give up. There's nothing. Nothing I can do. Done my
All
part.
right, George. Good to see you. Call back
Love you
anytime.
guys.
All right, George. Take care.
I will.
Thanks for being here. George is something else.
I think that one's going to haunt me well into the evening.
Yes. George has that impact. Real quick, Tony, if you've got a minute
Sure.
to address
Yeah, I can do one
HQ, serious question. How did John Skipper pull a fast one on the ACC leadership presidents to get them to sign a grant of rights to 2036?
Look, I mean, the ACC was desperate. I mean, they were going to lose teams to other conferences. There were, as much as they had already pillaged the Big East, they were about to be pillaged, and this was a way to hold the conference together. Now, what he told them to get them to go to 2036, I can only imagine. There's desperation, and then there's, complete ridiculousness. ESPN, of course, has no desire to renegotiate anything because they're getting a bargain at this point, compared to what they're paying for the SEC, and compared to what the value of some of the schools at the ACC is. They're getting a real bargain. So it's not in their best interest to renegotiate anything. They're sitting back saying, let the ACC figure it out, and we'll do what we have to do after that. But I mean, the ACC was desperate, and when you're backed into a corner, you do desperate things. The landscape of college football in terms of who's in what conferences would be dramatically different right now if they had not signed the grant of rights.
Tony, I will make one comment that I have not heard out of anyone. So let's understand this, that while the ACC has fallen behind the SEC and the Big Ten, both immediately and certainly projecting forward, or not even projecting, just seeing what the contract stipulations are going forward in 2024, let's understand that the ACC valuation is not as strong as those other conferences. So a competitive landscape is different than a equal landscape, meaning that, the valuation of those schools and what they're bringing to the table in regards to TV viewers doesn't match the Big Ten and the SEC. So they shouldn't be gaining a contract. So they're in the rears in regards to the gap. But if everything was negotiated on equal terms, they wouldn't be making as much money anyway.
That's true. When you look at it as conference compared to conference, that is absolutely true, which is why my best sense, and again, I recognize I'm in an extreme minority numerically, that there are a handful of schools that start the litigation next year, because as a conference, you're right, there's no comparison. But if you're Florida State, you're going to go in and you're going to draw paperwork that says, there is no way, using your term, the valuation, there's no way my valuation is half of what Rutgers is to the Big Ten, or to, Maryland, or whatever the case may be. And you're actually going not at the Big Ten. If you're Florida State, you're not saying, I accuse the Big Ten of this. You accuse your own conference of financial malfeasance by not staying competitive with the other conferences, knowing that at least at the top third of the conference, you've got Clemson, you've got Florida State, you've got Miami. Pick another one or two out of that, beyond that, in major market that's got some value to it. and your cause of action, your target is really your own existing conference, because as a whole, no, there's no comparison. Individually broken up into pieces, you're going to say, look, sure, we're not even saying we have the same value as Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State, but certainly we have the same value as Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, whatever the case may be. Certainly these, you got to at least put us in that category, and we're not even there.
Yeah.
So you break up, instead of looking at it as a whole, you have to break it up into the individual pieces.
And just to clarify my point, and I know that you get it, is that if someone negotiated all the conferences with all the same media partners, and so it was all fairly done from the same perspective at the same time. If the Big Ten is worth $80 million per school, maybe the ACC is worth 60
to 65. Yeah, sure.
So just to kind of clarify that for everyone, while we're talking about a gap between the ACC and the Big Ten and the SEC, some of that's justified.
Absolutely. Some
based
of it
on viewership.
Some of it is lack of a better phrase off the top of my head. Some of it is natural selection, quite frankly. Sure. This is just what you're worth based on where you are and what you bring to the table. No question about that. The issue isn't that the gap is 15 million, it's that it's 30 million and growing.
Yeah, just as a glowing example, and I won't even pick on the ACC, Ohio State Northwestern. Not a very good football game, not a very good football draw, you would think. And we were doing this and running through the ratings during a series we posted. That game drew more than any Pac-12 game the entire season.
Sure.
Rutgers and Ohio State on the Big Ten Network was the only time the entire season that a Big Ten Network game outdrew an ESPN game head-to-head.
Right.
Jimmy Touchdown is the ACC's problem that it is full of a lot of little brother schools. Do you think that adding flagship schools like West Virginia and UConn could help in the future in terms of perception? Seems to be an issue for the Big 12 too. So in terms of flagship schools, what do we have? One in North Carolina. We've got one in Virginia. We've got one in Florida. Now, I guess that's it for the conference.
Yeah. One in South Carolina, Clemson, I'm
talking about like official academic
official flagship schools. Yeah. No, I see what you're saying.
Carolina. Yeah.
No, I get what you're saying.
That's how I took it.
Okay. Yeah. Look, in terms of little brother schools, sure. It's full of, every conference is full of little brother schools. I mean, the SEC has Missouri and Vanderbilt and, whoever else you want to kick around. Every conference has them. Do they have a disproportionate amount of them? Maybe. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. Adding UConn and West Virginia doesn't exactly give you a big boost. We talked earlier, UConn actually adds cachet for basketball. It's still very TBD for football. And West Virginia, I mean, football program's got a lot of problems right now in terms of staying competitive. So while there is a solid fan base there, I don't really know that it's going to move the needle if they were to move to the ACC. I don't think it really changes that much. The Big 12, obviously, it lost its haymakers with Oklahoma and Texas soon to leave. But it did a viable job of picking 4 schools to replace 2 and schools with active fan bases. I think the Big 12 is going to like having BYU in there, frankly. It's a really strong fan base. And they travel well on the road and things like that. So, it did fine. There weren't other marquee names to go pick up that they were going to be able to get within their financial framework. So they did the best they could. Again, the ACC, it's got some little brothers, but so do the rest of the conferences.
And it's a great debate as to which of those 4 additions to the Big 12 is going to be the most successful, because you can make a case for each one of them. They're very much on equal footing
Brett Yormark
currently
did a
in
good
the
job
ACC.
with who he went out and got. It was well done in terms geographically. You may scratch your head at some of it, but from a sports standpoint, from a football standpoint, they were good choices.
And finally today, Jimmy Touchdown back at it. Thank you for this, Jimmy. My best guess is that Florida State and Clemson will argue that the ACC breached its contract because they were promised significant revenue increases with the ACC network coming on board.
There was not a percentage promise of how much the revenue would grow. The grant of rights is convoluted in its wording, and I tend to think intentionally so because, skeptical of attorneys, they got to make their money. But it does state that the conference will make sure that it is that it continues to provide, and I'm reading from the recitals on page 1, providing valuable benefits to each member institution of the conference. So there's your breach. There's your potential breach of contract, is that, you are no longer providing valuable benefits to Florida State or Clemson or whatever, because you're no longer financially competitive with the other conferences of the same magnitude.
Tony, thank you so much for being here. We kept you for a long time.
That's
but
all right. Glad to do it, Mark.
Always appreciate the conversation.
I
Everybody,
enjoy hanging out with the smart people.
No. We appreciate the smart people showing up to help us all navigate this. Everybody should follow Tony on Twitter, and also go to Last Word on College Football. And again, it's at Tony Bruin.
Yeah, I didn't change it when I moved to Charlotte.
Yeah.
Hey, one quick announcement, real quick, about Last Word on College Football, if I may.
Of course.
About 3 weeks ago, we signed a syndication deal with Yardbarker, the aggregate site. So you can also find our articles on there. I mean, obviously, we're more than happy if you come to our site, because you'll see all of our articles. But starting tomorrow, we signed the syndication agreement with MSN.com also. So you will be able to find many of our articles, not just for Last Word on College Football, but for the network as a whole, our baseball department and hockey and so on and so forth. You'll, if you have MSN.com on your feed, you'll be able to find our articles on there as well, starting sometime late next week. So it's big news for us that we now have 2 syndication agreements, companies that want to share our work and help us put it out there.
Absolutely. That's phenomenal. Again, Last Word on College Football, everyone. Tony, again, thank you so much for all that you do and everything that you bring to the table when you join us. Thank you for your time and insight.
All right, Mark, glad to do it. Be well.
Thank you, too. Tony Syracusa, Last Word on College Football. Again, it's at Tony Bruin is the Twitter handle. You want to follow him. Jimmy, thank you for the contribution. Thank you, Tony. Wonderful insight. Absolutely. Again, we've got Twisted Rooster showing up at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, both here on the main channel and simulcasting on the South Carolina channel. Twisted Rooster at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We've got our normal lineup of Clemson football talk with Jordan and Tiger Paw Craven coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern Time on the Clemson channel. Meanwhile, I'm going to work on a few of these topics we talked about during the course of our conversation for the last 2.5 hours regarding a number of these aspects to this. So I'm going to get right at it. So expect some content out of me. We have another segment coming from myself and Steve Dace to deliver to all of you very soon. So be looking out for those. And still the program rankings, rankings 1 through 25 will be out. So I've got my hands full, and you will see it all right here at the Voice of College Football. Thanks for being here. See you next time.